Hey everybody. It's a little bit of a new episode of ECL here, but we're going back to the old format, or rather, format that we've used maybe once or twice. It's ECL Flashforward. This is Will Young, and we are going to be looking at, an episode of Arthur that Lucas and I have not touched yet, and it will take a little while before we do. But the opportunity, it came around to talk about this episode with somebody that I think has a lot to say and a lot that you should hear. Her name is Kara Oliver. She is an educator from New York, and she did a TED Talk on YouTube about Arthur, and it's called Everyday Wonderful Community Building in Relation to Arthur. You can go check it out right now, and the episode we're talking about is In My Africa, which is from season 14. It aired in April 2011. So if you want to check out the episode, please be my guest. I would really recommend that you do. In case you don't get the vibe from this one, I really liked it, and Kara did too. I think you'll really like her, and I think that this is one of the most informative talks that I have had with a guest. No disrespect to our other guests. We have a lot of fun. But this one, I think I learned a lot talking to Kara, and I think you will too. And yeah, it's just really enlightening, and I hope that you guys enjoy it like I did. So we're going to go to it now. I'm talking with Kara on the phone, so the audio is going to be a little bit different than normal, but I think that the content is there, and I really hope you enjoy it. Here is the ECL Flash Forward with myself and with Kara Oliver. Hey everybody, and joining me on the line here is Kara Oliver. Hey Kara.
Hi there, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, and how about yourself?
I'm doing great, feeling great, as great as I can be in a pandemic, but really, really excited to be joining you today.
For sure. I'm really glad for that as well. I mean, it's funny, we were both connected by a friend of the show, DJ Bob, and after seeing, what's your thoughts on Arthur, your video that was related to Arthur, I was like, I need to talk to this person.
I'm so excited. Yeah, shout out to DJ Bob. He's awesome.
For sure. So, Kara, for our audience here, I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself, both in terms of, like, what do you do, and also I want to talk about what your relationship is with Arthur, the show.
Absolutely. So, first and foremost, thank you again for having me. I really currently, in where I'm at right now, I'm originally from New York City. And being from New York City, it exposed me to so many different things. And growing up, Arthur was a staple in my house, pretty much because my mom was a school teacher growing up. So TBS was always in our homes. And, when I was younger, it was hard to, find things that I could relate to, right? And for some reason, I just gravitated towards Arthur, and I can remember the very, first episode that I watched. And it was Arthur's pet, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And as I got older, and grew, the messages from Arthur really just grasped my attention, and they really just honed in on to some of the things that I became passionate about, like social justice, diversity, equity, and belonging. And I could talk a little bit more about that in my work. And it helped me relate better to the populations in which I serve, which was predominantly youth and students, high school students and college-age students. So one day I was like, you know what, I need to find ways to better relate to them. And how can I do that, right? So in order, I think, to serve youth, you have to think back on your experiences, but not make it, solely about you, but just reflect back on that wonder and that open, devil may care attitude, right? And so, growing up, I said, you know what, this is what can I do to change? And I looked back on the Arthur theme song, and one day I caught myself singing literally at my desk. I kid you not. I'm like, every day when you're walking down the street. And I was like, oh, my God, I haven't watched Arthur in years. That's it, Arthur. And so I started using it in my work. In my previous job, I worked at a very small nonprofit called the National Federation for Just Communities of Western New York, which is an organization dedicated to eradicating, the ills of society, right? Like, racism, prejudice, injustice of all kinds. And so when I was working with the students in our youth program, I talked to him about Arthur, and it was something I felt good about it because I'm like, okay, they're not going to just look at me like this old millennial anymore. They're going to look at me as someone who's cool. No, they still look at me as someone who's an old millennial, which is okay. But they were like, I remember Arthur. I still watch it. And these are, that, 16, to 17, 18 cohorts. I was like, okay, this works, in that age range. So I'm like, okay, so this is good. And you know what? One day I got so passionate about it, and another good mutual friend of ours, Cameron Garrity, he, put out the TEDx Buffalo for our local region, and asked for a proposal, and then the rest is history. And I did a TED Talk about it.
You sure did. That TED Talk is called Everyday Wonderful Community Building in Relation to Arthur, and it's available on YouTube right now. So you answered one of the questions I had of kind of how it came to be. We're going to talk in a little bit. Yeah, no, it's all good. You beat me to it. We're going to talk in a little bit about how about kind of the meat of the matter, but of course I want to encourage people to go watch it on YouTube. It's really great, and it's primarily how I found you. I wanted to also ask about. Yeah, of course. What are the reactions that you've seen from it, from people who saw the talk live or people who have come across it on YouTube?
Wow. So, you know what? It's always interesting when, I think as a creator and someone who loves content and media, I'm very critical of myself. And I know that's something that is difficult sometimes. So when I'm looking out into the audience, it was this feeling of all, inspiration, because I can see a lot of people get that aha moment. And you're, again, in the audience, we're looking at, different people from different racial ethnic backgrounds. We're looking at people from different religious backgrounds, right? We're, so much diversity in the room. And I'm looking at people, some had the aha moment, some were confused. And then as I'm going along, people are like, okay, I understand the connection. But I want to say one of the most gratifying moments for me was a teacher who came up to me, and I did not know this person. And again, I'm thinking I totally bombed it. So thank you for your praise. I still think I was like, oh my God, I cringed looking at it. But, when I look back on it now and people will say, hey, thank you for that. And that teacher came up to me and was like, you know what, I want to thank you because I think a lot of people forget how pivotal this show is to, generations and, to know your passion, right? And that's what it was really for. It wasn't just my passion for the work that I do, but the passion for the show because what it did for me. And I know that might be a little self-serving, and I'm okay with that, but it was one of those moments for me. It was like, your story, and I don't know if you've ever heard this quote, but sometimes your story isn't for you, it's for someone else. And right. Arthur made such a big impact on me and on the lives of these students that they were able to take these lessons and implement it. And to see and hear an educator, and I have a profound respect for educators. I feel like they do not get the credit that they deserve. To have an educator come to me and tell me, hey, I really did appreciate that. Thank you. That was validation enough. And so I think back to people like my mom and, who gave her life effortlessly teaching her students, and other teachers that I encountered in my lifetime. It really brought that moment home, and to see people smiling and, at glee, when they're, that spark of nostalgia comes up, like, wow, I remember that episode. I used to watch that as a kid, or I now watch it with my, nieces and nephews, or I watch it with my daughter or my children or my students, it really did bring it home. So it was a really cool reaction. Sometimes I still can't believe it.
That's awesome. I'm so glad that was able to happen for you. Now, in the talk, this was when I was watching it, and I was like, okay, I've got to have this person on the show. And I was like, okay, how can I do that? And I remembered that, well, we have a specific type of episode that we do where we kind of flash forward to where we are on the Elwood City Limits timeline, and then we go forward to an episode. And there just happened to be an episode that you talked about that I had never heard of before and certainly never seen before, and I figured who better to talk about it than you, because it is part of your, when you talk about stereotyping and how listening to one another produces a human connection. It's the first part of your 3 steps toward community building, which is a big part of your TED Talk. You talked about the episode In My Africa, which is from season 14. It aired in April 2011, and I would really like to kind of go along with you and talk about the episode as it relates to what you have to say about it, and just in general, because I'm really curious, kind of your take on it as somebody who doesn't immerse themselves in Arthur like I do, like every day of every week.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in My Africa, as you said, it was, the 14th season and the 9th episode in the 14th season. And it was, my process, going through Arthur and going through the episodes. So when I did the TEDx talk, I looked at episodes from the first season all the way up until season 16. And this episode, I shared the same sentiment as you because I had never saw it. But then again, by the time Arthur came, by the time this episode aired, I was, in undergrad and, drowning in work. So of course, it was natural that I wouldn't have seen it, but I was so happy to see how the show's plotline developed. And so to summarize the episode, it focuses on DW's new classmate, Sheik, who is actually a cousin of Brain, which is one of the pivotal characters in the show, one of Arthur's friends. And Sheik, and it took me, when I researched and went back, I was like, oh my God, he's related to Brain, so it makes sense. And him and his family moved from Senegal, and they moved to Elwood City, which is, pretty much based in, the United States or, North America. And, DW comes to this realization that she doesn't know much about Africa. And she wants to get a little bit more, she wants to befriend him and, and wants to build a relationship. But what's the way you build relationships? And I think BW and her, childlike whimsy, like all of us, was inundated with stereotypes about Africa. And so, he comes into class and she makes him this beautiful picture, but the picture is pretty much filled with, stereotypes about Africa. Like, oh my God, she makes this comment about, what her perception of Africa is. Like, you must outrun lions and you must outrun, and bear, all these stereotypes about the African animals,
one of my favorite parts of the episode is Shake responding to that of, where did you learn this nonsense?
Right. And I love that because it's in a childlike manner. And they give and this is one of the things I love about Arthur in this episode, is that they give children the intellectual respect that they deserve, right? Because I think a lot of times we kind of dull it down for children because we think that they don't understand when they actually do. And so to him, it's like, he's checking her in a nice way, like, hey, I don't know where you got this from. And then the Tipples, and their, the terrible Tipples, as they're known, the twin adversaries, I call them frenemies of DW, kind of let her know that you don't know much about Africa. And, DW being the bold feminist icon that we love, says that, actually, I'm going to learn. And then Sheik explains to her, Africa is actually not a country, which is a common, misconception about Africa. I traveled to Africa and, I can, attest to this. I was DW at one time. Growing up in New York City, at my first international traveling abroad experience was at 17 to Uganda. And like many people, I had that, bravado, and it's like, oh my God, this country, they're inundated with poverty. They're inundated with this. Things that are sort of true, but we don't get into the why this is a thing, why these social iniquities happen. We don't talk about colonialism and things like that. Now, the show doesn't get into that, but it, kind of just blankets a bigger problem that we have with a lot of countries that are different than ours. We look at stereotypes. We look at, and those stereotypes turn into prejudices and even microaggressions. A lot of what DW was saying, and I could be reaching, and I'm okay with that, I was very microaggressive towards Sheik. And to be called out on it by him and, to him to reclaim his space and say, something, actually, no, you're wrong. Let me educate you. Africa is not a country, it's a continent comprised. And they, break out into this beautiful song.
This song, Oh
Oh
my
yeah.
God, this song is kind of a bop. Like I was like sometimes with kids shows it can be a little hit or miss to like on how the shows. And I mean, Arthur's had a ton of songs in the time that it's aired. Some of them are okay, some of them are really catchy. This is on the catchy side. I was getting into this.
Yes, like In My Africa is it's one of my actually favorite song interludes in the episode. I think Arthur is known for some of the most memorable things, i.e. Library, the library
Yeah,
song. But
yeah.
I think that and with this episode they break it down you know they break it down where it's palatable and understandable, and they have this dialogue, not debate. I think that's important too. It's like he didn't, he by himself was a little offended, but he knew that she was just ignorant towards what Africa is about. So let me educate you. So she went home, starts reading books, and then she, reaches out to her brother and, Arthur explained, to DW, and this is like an Easter egg in the show, kind of, I don't know if I want to call it that, but I will in this case. Arthur had his pen pal Adil, who was from Turkey. And,
Yes.
he explained to her, it was hard for me to kind of learn and understand, what, he went, what he goes through and what his country is like. He had to educate me. Adil had to educate me. So maybe you need to learn from someone who is from that country, who knows more about it than you do. And then Arthur said, something, instead of like, he could have used that as a typical big brother moment to tease her and taunt her a little bit, but he used it as an education moment because he went through it a few seasons ago, and we can remember that. So
I'm really glad that you brought that up because that was one of the episodes. I was going back through the episode guide because I knew that Arthur has been a great show of continuing its own tradition of representing other countries and other ways of life, and that was one of the episodes I zeroed in on, which the kind of bones of it were very much the same as this one. That's being Dear Adil, but even with other episodes like Arthur and Los Vecinos, where their neighbors move in and they're Latinx, or Buster's Amish mismatch, where they go into Amish country. It's a great tradition of the show that I'm glad to say has been one of its calling cards, and this one's no different.
Yes. And I'm glad you brought that up. Like, and that's one of the wonderful things about art. One of the wonderful things about Arthur. I mean, they take these anthropomorphic animals who have real life, racial ethnic backgrounds, which has always been interesting to me. And, Arthur deals with so many things like privilege and socioeconomics, and, they, like I said, they make it palatable for children. But with this My Africa episode, it was so nice to see it from the context of Africa, because I think from a Eurocentric point of view, a lot of these stereotypes continue to plague, Africa and other, nations.
Right, yeah.
Which is, like, okay, like we see the poverty commercials and, and yes, there is poverty, but we don't get into why these things have happened. We don't talk about structural racism or institutionalized racism or colonialism. So this, episode gives a nice, I want to say, light introduction into what that looks like, where it's not adversarial, because these things can be personal. Like, if you're from somewhere and someone tells you what it's about, and this is what it is, and it's like, well, actually, it's, that can be very offensive, especially to children. We think about bullying, but she does it in a way, and the episode is so well written, and I think, it was written by Ken Pontac, who is a phenomenal writer on Arthur, and has done a great job of busting out some of the harder episodes. And you can tell that there was a really big, initiative to make sure that the cultural aspect is, representative in this episode. And so, even from the scene where they call the brain, and the brain is telling, DW about ways you can learn. So giving her that option, like, this is how you can do it. Some of these ways are difficult. So, what DW said, something, what about a song? What better way than a song? I know when I was growing up, the way I learned all of the presidents of the United States was through a song. So shout out to my, 10th grade history teacher. I got to give him a big shout out there for that. But, songs,
That's awesome.
Yeah, like phonetic, like ways to, like, you can remember. Like, it's really, really cool.
Sure.
And it was awesome. And, one of the pivotal scenes from that episode that I really, really liked was when the Tibbles, you know, they were always teasing me W. He was like, well, you're not going to remember. You're going to humiliate yourself. And she said, no, she's not, because I'm going to be up there with her. So it shows that solidarity, and it shows, you know, she's educated herself, but I'm going to stand with her. And to me, what that goes back to is a sociological, you know, a thought of power over, power for, and power with. And what that represents is, you know, power over is, you know, I'm going to tell you what it is. Power for is, I'm going to help advocate for you, but I'm still going to do some things for you. And power with is, I'm standing next to you. I am an advocate. I am an ally. And those power structures fluctuate over time, right? So that reminded me of that sociological school of thought. And it was so nice because he's like, you know, you're someone who I'm welcoming into my culture, and I want to teach you and I want to educate you so you're not ignorant on it. But at the same time, I'm not going to, you know, punish you for not knowing. Here is how I can educate you. And then the very last scene, Miss Morgan, who was their teacher, introduces a new student, and I believe his name was Keith, and he was from Kalamazoo, which is in, you know, the United States. And the teacher asked, hey, does anyone know anything about Kalamazoo? And DW raises her hand, and she hesitates a little bit. But she said, I don't know, but I would like to learn. And then the episode finishes. So the overarching lesson here that I loved about this episode is that there are teachable moments, and there are ways to educate without hurting. There are ways to educate without even on the reciprocal, because it's the art of, you know, reciprocity, right? I can educate you and you can educate me, but I can still stand in my truth and let you know what it is without being offensive. And if I do come off a little offensive, know that it's coming from a place of love, because I want to teach you. And I think Sheik was able to do that in The Brain and all these, you know, characters that come together for a teachable moment. So this has been and will always be one of my favorite episodes. And a lot of cultural references, the pop cultural reference. In the episode, Sheik and The Brain were walking across a zebra crossing, which I think was a nice nod to the Beatles album, Abbey Road. I just love that. So
that's a good catch. I totally missed that one.
I think of very weird things. So I looked at that. I was like, hey, that's really cool. So that definitely was something that was big for me. And, you know, I used that episode to teach our students and, you know, the TED Talk and the audience about, you know, cultural awareness and what the work is, right? Because I think we talk about the work, and I put that in quotations, right? And the work is hard. You know, it's ugly. It requires you to deconstruct, reconstruct, and construct. And what I mean by that is it requires you to deconstruct everything that you were taught, because not everything you were taught was necessarily correct, right? It requires you to construct and form your own opinions, right? And then it causes you to reconstruct how those opinions and those ideas, those ideologies and beliefs apply to your life and the lives of others, especially ones that you serve. So, you know, I really did enjoy this episode because it touched on all of that in a way that was safe, and it created a safe space, which Arthur always does.
Well, I have there's one lasting criticism I have of the episode, and that's in the song "In My Africa," they rhymed potato with equator. So I don't think it can come back from that.
Yeah, you're right. I did it. That was kind of cheesy. I think it was a reach, but you know, they were like, "Oh, potato, equator." You know, it needed something to rhyme, right? But
of course.
I think that's funny.
To go off topic a little bit, you know, in the song they talk about a lot of African cuisine, and like I was watching this around lunchtime, I was getting hungry, and then I remembered that you and I have added each other on Facebook, and I've seen you cooking up a lot of really yummy things lately. It's making me a little jealous. During this quarantine time, what's been your favorite dish to cook?
Oh man. Okay. So wow, this is awesome. So I do cook. I love to cook in my spare time for sure. And I think I draw inspiration from so many different things, but I think my most favorite thing to cook thus far was this Biscoff French toast. My fiance, Paul, is really, like, he's a sweetheart, and I'm not just saying that, but he really is, and he loves the Biscoff cookie. So my best friends back in the city, I've been making them care packages to send, because there's a, they can't get access to certain things being in the city. So I'm in Buffalo, by the way, for my listeners, which is about an 8-hour drive, hour plane ride. So I said, well, let me get them some cookies. And, I was eating the ice cream. This pop actually came out with an ice cream. And if anyone is not familiar with Biscoff cookies, please get them because they're so good, but they're addicting. Don't eat the whole pack like me. I can go through a pack in a day. And they actually released the ice cream. And they are known as the airplane cookies because they serve them on airplanes usually. And so when that's how I found out about it. I'm like, oh my God, how did I not know? Also, if you have tried Biscoff and not be too sure, if you've ever had speculoos or cookie butter from Trader Joe's, that is what a Biscoff cookie is. It's like this gingery based cookie. It's so good. And so I in one of my moments, I had an aha moment. I said, hey, why don't I make a brioche French toast? I had all this leftover brioche bread, and, I just took some crushed cookies and I had some stale Cinnamon Toast Crunch cereal. And I said, okay, let me mash this up, and you just make it like a regular French toast, but you bake it. And so that was like my favorite recipe thus far. And Taco Tuesdays. I do Taco Tuesdays every Tuesday, and we just celebrate Cinco de Mayo. Oh, yeah, for real, man. And so, I was like, all right, we're going all out. So we did, barbacoa tacos, shrimp and lobster tacos. My fiance's a pescatarian, so,
I just had dinner and I'm getting hungry all over again. Oh, my God.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, bro. That is my jam. So thank you for bringing that up. I love cooking, so
of course.
That's my thing.
So we're kind of wrapping up with this one here. I just wanted to note while we still have you that talking about the song itself, and I mean we can talk about this in the episode in general. I mean I find that the best kids shows often teach me new things. I'm talking like me, the 30-year-old me, even watching them as an adult, and throughout watching the song, I was like, oh, I'm learning all kinds of things I didn't know before because I've never been to Africa myself. I'm a white guy living in Eastern Canada, so my knowledge it can be pretty lacking at times. So I learned a lot. I really thought it was a great episode, but I'm honestly surprised this episode isn't talked about more with some of the more famous episodes in the Arthur canon. I mean, I've only first heard about it through your TED Talk.
Wow, yeah, it's interesting. I think Arthur, unfortunately, and this is not just with Arthur, but I think shows dealing with racial, ethnic connotations is always like one of those gray areas. And as great as this show is, and as great as this episode was, I think this was one of the ones that kind of got overshadowed. And I think now, and to bring up, not to, dive into something else, but, the most recent episode, Mr. Ratburn's Wedding was so pivotal for the Arthur series because it dealt with a topic that hasn't been talked about in a lot of children's shows, especially in this way on public television. And, the issue, not the issue, but, the celebration of love pertaining to same-sex marriage. And it was always so interesting because I think in a lot of, I follow a lot of fan pages, there was always, the question of Mr. Ratburn's sexuality. And I think with that, no one could tell because he never talked about it. But where I think with this episode in particular, and like I said, this is just my own opinion, race and ethnicity is just one of those things that, not that it gets swept under the rug usually, but it's kind of like, okay, well, we can see that, or we can hear that, or that's something that we know that already, right? And it's so unfortunate because I do think that this episode was one of the best written episodes because of the context of the episode, right? So you have, this character who is from Africa who comes and educates. And we haven't seen that. We had Los Vecinos, like you said, they were Latinx. We've had, some other European countries. But we haven't had Africa yet, which is so surprising, having given, this is in the 14th season. But I think it was done, and on the flip side of that coin, to play devil's advocate here, I'm glad that they did it the way that they did. Again, this is now, 2008, 9, 10, 11, 3 years into the Obama presidency. And race is becoming a bigger topic in, America, like now having open conversations. Like we talked about it, but we weren't really talking about it. So I also do think that this episode did come out at a good time, because now we can educate. Like there's a difference, right? We have African American and then we have African, and even within culturally, there's sometimes often contention with terminology. And should we say Black? Should we say African American? If you're African, I'm not just African. You represent your country and your home. So having these conversations and opening up the dialogue. And I think this episode did a great job of that. And I think the timing was good. Shocked that it hadn't, they haven't touched on it before in different ways. They did it subtly, but I think for the time and that we were in, it was right on time.
Well, Kara, I certainly couldn't have said a lot of what you said better myself, so I think you were the exact right person to talk about this with. So, of course, I want to direct all of our listeners again to, it's on YouTube, your TEDx Talk. It's called Everyday Wonderful Community Building in Relation to Arthur. I wanted to give you the opportunity as well. Is there anywhere else that you would like to direct our listeners, either to your organization or anything else that you can think of, if you have a presence online or anything like that?
Well, absolutely. So I'm actually a published children's author. Excuse me.
No way.
So yes, I did. So I am. So I actually wrote a book, a children's book, actually dealing with some of the very topics that we just talked about. Growing up, and I'll make it quick. Growing up in New York City again. I am Afro-Latina. I'm darker skinned. So growing up as a, darker skinned Black girl, Afro-Latina, I struggled a lot with identity. It was always, you're darker skinned, so you're ugly, and this, that, and the third. And as I got older, I started, seeing my niece, who I love, Kylie, so I want to shout her out. She's really excited. Dealing with some of the same things that I dealt with. And I remember someone told me, and I always hold this with me, a lot of times we say somebody has to do something, but I was somebody who could do something, right? So I'm calling out, somebody has to address this. And I started doing research in undergrad, and my master's project, about colorism in the media dovetailed into this. And I looked at a statistic in 2018 that stated only about 10% of children's books feature children of color, in particularly Black children. When you get to Native American children, it's less than 1%. So, it goes into this theory of mirrors and windows, which is another tiny back to Arthur, why I love the show so much, because it gave a lot of children who had a lot of windows, some mirrors to see positive reflections of themselves, even in anthropomorphic animals. But I said, you know what? Children of color need a voice, and they need to know that they're worthy of being shown in positive light. If I'm being honest, a lot of the media content that we have featuring children of color sometimes is very negative. And so if I'm always told that I'm bad, or that, people who look like me are bad, I'm going to start to believe that. So this book, You Go Girl, A Letter to Young Queens, is pretty much a love letter to young girls everywhere, but particularly young girls of color. I wrote with them in mind because I was talking to myself. And it was things that, that I wish I had the confidence growing up to believe. And so I said, even if one little girl reads this book and they feel better about themselves, I'm okay with that. I don't have to make another dime, so it's available on Amazon, and, you can follow me on Instagram, YGG Book. That's YGG Book. You can follow me on my personal page, Kara Oliver. I'm on Facebook predominantly. I am an old millennial, and I'm proud of it. I am also on, I'm not on Twitter, really, but definitely on Instagram and Facebook.
I'm just following you there right now. Well, Kara, it's been a real treat talking to you. I'm really glad that we were able to put this together, and I really hope that you're able to. I hope that we're all able to get through this quarantine period safe and sound. So, thank you very much for joining me here on this ECL Flashforward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and you stay safe and healthy, and thank you all for listening.
Will do. My name's Will Young for Elwood City Limits. We'll see you next time.